Hi. So yes, I'm Alex Brenon, and I work for the 5-college blended learning and digital humanities program. Over the past year, we've conducted surveys of faculty and students to learn more about their attitudes with teaching and technology. And today I'll talk about the experience of running those surveys as well as their outcomes and some recommendations that we've created based on what we learned. All right. Sorry, I'm navigating two computers here. There we go. So first, what is 5-college blended learning and digital humanities? It's not just a mouthful, although we do shorten it to 5-col BLDH. We're a joint program through the 5 colleges consortium in Western Massachusetts, and we are funded by some grants from Mellon and Teagle, as well as the 5 college deans. Our primary thing is that we provide grants and assistance to faculty members throughout the colleges, and this has been both blended learning through some grants and digital humanities through others. And 2 years ago, we had those two as separate programs and decided to merge them, partially due to funding and partially because they really are, as we view them, two sides of the same coin. We also have every year a cohort of undergraduate students who are our digital humanities fellows who do fantastic work, and we support them with grants and kind of just bringing them together so they can all work with each other. And this year, some of their projects included one about banned books and censorship, another one about queer home and homemaking in Paris. So it always kind of ranges, and it's really fun to see what the students do. So today, I'll start by talking about the faculty feedback. Next, the digital tools in the academy class, as well, and then get into kind of the main part that I've worked on, which is the students in blended learning classes surveys. And like I said, I'll end with some recommendations about what students say they'd like for us to do. So, in August 2018, we surveyed the professors who had worked with us previously on our blended learning grant from the Mellon Foundation. The grant funded classes from 2014 and 2018, and we reached out to everyone who had worked with us under that, meaning that some people had been done with their project for like 3 years and some had just wrapped up their class, which gave us some interesting perspectives on how that differed. We had a fantastic response rate, and in the survey we asked about their experiences with our program specifically, as well as what the effects had been on their teaching since then. It was something we were really interested in. All of our faculty members agreed that the grant experience had a positive impact on our teaching, so that's great, but they were overall kind of ambivalent about the amount of impact it had. So it was great, but some of them, it was just maybe affecting them overall, not in concrete ways. They also said that their students pretty much all reacted positively to the technologies used in the course. And when asked what they'd like to share with our program, they had some interesting insights. Many of them talked about growing pains through the semester that they had the grant, and discussed the types of help they would have appreciated. As a group, they were interested in more detailed technical help as well as follow-up support, but that was unfortunately beyond the scope of the program we were funding them for, but it's something we would love to look into for the future for other grants. And they also agreed, I think as many of you will, that the technologies that were added were very helpful, but not a substitute for face-to-face learning. And that's where we get our blended from. Okay, so the first student group was students in this class called Digital Tools in the Academy. It was taught by Eric Paler, who's a classics professor at UMass, as well as the director of the 5-col BLDH program. It was a first-year seminar, open only to freshman undergraduates, and the goal of these at UMass is to help them just get introduced to UMass through a more focused lens. And this one was giving a primer of basic technologies that are used on campus. The students are all required to take a first-year semester, but get to choose which one they want. So this was very self-selected based on what students thought they needed help with coming into school. It also used the lens of Roman archaeology, which is Professor Paler's research subject, but had a broad scope. So it was just using that to kind of contextualize these tools, but went far beyond what just like very specific tools that classic students might use. So throughout the semester, there were 3 assignments, like 3 big assignments meant to acquaint the students with different parts of the UMass tech ecosystem. So these were primarily Google Suite, Microsoft, and Moodle, but did extend into other realms as well. Students also kept technology journals where they wrote an entry each week summarizing what they were feeling about how they learned. And if you'd like to learn more about this class, you can visit that bit.ly link, which is bit.ly/digacademy, which is the course website that was created. So Professor Paler created 2 surveys for the beginning and end of this semester to kind of very broadly assess the course. The entrance survey asked students to self-report their familiarity levels with different tools and with technology in general, and he made sure to use very intentionally informal language. Of the students, 81% reported being comfortable or very comfortable with technology in general, with none of them saying they were very uncomfortable. So for the specific tools, every student was familiar with Google products, especially Google Docs. That was just across the board. And they also tended to use Google products like Sheets and Slides more often than Microsoft, the Microsoft code, like Excel and PowerPoint. But they did generally feel comfortable with Microsoft as well. Less commonly, but I think still noticeable, quite a few students had used audio-visual processing softwares like Camtasia and Audacity. But on the other side of the spectrum, very few students knew anything about library techniques and web development as well, that were both ones that are specific to UMass and beyond. So even WordPress, which is obviously not a UMass thing, was only used very briefly by 1 student in this class. The exit survey asked students more about their experiences within the class. Students also gave predictions for the future of tech in higher education. Most of them agreed that technology use will continue to grow and become a more standard part of education. And it was cool, some were very positive about their expected future of augmented and virtual reality, and others were talking about the benefits of like satellite broadband and what that can bring to campuses and the world in terms of like access. Okay, so in the fall 2018 semester, I studied 3 classes that used blended learning techniques. The first is digital culture, which is a comparative literature class taught every semester by different members of that department. And that semester it was taught by Annie Volocki. The class is an interdisciplinary exploration of digital culture, focusing on the ways that digital tools are used to interact with each other as well as the world. Professor Volocki incorporated technology into primarily the content of the course, but also used things like weekly Moodle posts to bring it outside of the classroom. And then the students had an option for the final project. You could either write a paper, since it was a comparative literature course, or you could do a project that kind of reflected what you had learned through the semester. Every year, so second one, Professor Paler teaches a classics class that's just titled Pompeii. It's an examination of the history of the ancient city of Pompeii, which is his primary research subject, and that's where he is right now. Beautiful weather. Students in this class are usually juniors and seniors, and they have some previous knowledge of the overall concepts of history and archaeology. And so there are 3 major assignments over this semester, all of which use digital tools to complete. So some of the primary ones were Twitter, the HathiTrust Bookworm, and audio processing software. The final project for the fall was a really cool podcast where students took on the persona of a victim of the 79 AD eruption of Mount Vesuvius and really tied together a whole bunch of things that they had learned throughout the course. All right, and the final one is art games, which was an art and code class taught in the art department by Professor Shane Mecklenburger. The main focus of the course was for students to create both board and video games, and many of the class sessions were workshops where they were actively involved in creating these games and working with other students. The professor also invited artists to come in and give talks about their work. All right. So for me, selecting these 3 classes to study was rather difficult, as many blended learning classes don't put that term in the description. It's something that's shared, on the first day of class or on the syllabus. So I tried in UMass's course catalog searching things like digital, blended, tech, and I found a lot of computer science classes and very little else. You'll notice one of the things was called digital cultures, and so that's. So I also reached out to professors with whom our program had worked previously to see if they were teaching classes that semester that used blended learning. In this phase, I also offered to provide student feedback on the teacher as well as the course, hoping that that would kind of be an incentive to get people to say yes to me. As expected, I got many rejection responses, although quite a few of them were that the professor was on sabbatical for the fall or just wasn't teaching any courses using technology that semester and would be interested in the future. So it was pretty hopeful. And ultimately, I found these 3 classes, 2 of them through the course catalog, and 1 taught by the director of our program. So for kind of my methodology, I created 3 online surveys to check in with students at the beginning, middle, and end of the semester. At the beginning of the semester, I went into the classes to introduce myself and give a kind of really brief talk about what is blended learning and why am I here, and get initial thoughts from the students by just simply asking the class questions, asking them to raise their hands. At the end of the semester, I again went in, but this time I asked them to form small groups to discuss their feelings on these topics and then report out. And I'll talk about why that is in a moment. So going into the classes was a very interesting experience for me. At the beginning of each visit, I sent the professor out of the room in the hopes of increasing student honesty without that person there. This was also a great way to start using humor to connect with the students when I, shuffle their teacher out of the way. I found that using the fact that I was recently a student was one of my greatest assets in communicating with them. I really, truly had recently shared these experiences, so I had used some of the platforms they were talking about only a few years prior, and I could use humor to kind of say, oh, that didn't work well for me at all, and then help them kind of open up a bit. And in the first class visit, people definitely waited for others to start talking, and then started to feel more comfortable, as in most classes. But because of this initial reticence, I decided to make that second visit a small group format. Students were much more talkative within their groups than they ever were with me, and I still got to hear their answers by floating around while they were talking, as well as having them each write down notes on what their group thought. The online surveys were a combination of demographics and some short answer questions. I knew students were less likely to give good answers on a form, but I wanted to see an overall picture. And there were also some classes or questions rather, that repeated throughout all of the surveys. So like, do you think the technologies being used are a distraction from the class itself? And I also left it open to professors to add any questions that they might want to see in there, which was great because then when one professor suggested something, I could add it to the other 2 surveys as well. So, results. Of the 49 students surveyed in the blended learning classes, 73% said they didn't know what blended learning or digital humanities were at the beginning of the semester. And this also points to the fact that the digital tools in the academy class was really self-selected, whereas these 49 students just wanted to take a class and ended up in one with technology. A lot of the students agreed that the fact that the class used instructional tech didn't affect their decision to take these classes. And in the Pompeii class, all agreed at the beginning that they didn't think tech would be distracting, and that agreement continued throughout that class. About half of those students also said they were worried about understanding how to properly use the technology at the beginning, but nearly all of them said they were comfortable at the end, which is great. So now the students in the digital culture class were very mixed on whether they thought the technologies would be a distraction from the course, with 5 explicitly saying that they thought it would be a problem, and 9 of them giving reasons for their potential reservations, mostly that they can be a distraction, but it depends on how they're used. They were also relatively evenly split on whether they took it because it used tech. However, by the midterm survey, this is the one I'm proud of, nearly 90% agreed that the technologies were not a distraction from the course, which showed the professors' very effective use of tech as well as the benefits of the tools themselves. Overall, students agreed that using technology can be less stressful. You can't lose your papers if you can find them on a website. And they also liked online features, like being able to immediately receive feedback on answers. They were, like I said, they're overall positive, but we're kind of frustrated with a few aspects of how it's used at UMass. So we use up to 4 different types of websites to communicate with students. Spire, which is a UMass-specific tool for things like course registration, grades, finances. Then we also use Moodle and Blackboard, which are both learning management systems, and individual course websites, which are often built on WordPress, but really kind of vary in their setup and not all built on WordPress. And so they wish things were more centralized in general. They were also worried about access to specific tools. So many of the programs for the art and code class take so much CPU power that they can't just be run on their own laptops, meaning they need to use university computer labs. But some of these labs are only accessible during certain times, and most frustratingly, the versions of the programs can vary on computers across campus, meaning that students can't just work from various locations, they have to go to the same computer. So finally, when entering college, many students know these general technologies like Google Suite and social media, but not ones related to libraries and more specific purposes, showing that experiences like first-year seminars and library workshops are instrumental in helping those students find success with the tech they'll need. Also, access barriers should be minimized. Ideally, students should be able to access software right from their own computers, but sometimes that's not quite possible, and it should be, just easier to get to. And finally, centralizing and reusing technologies is incredibly important. If you can use something that students already have a handle on, you'll be able to get significantly more progress throughout the semester. And so overall, students really enjoyed using technology in classes, and everyone we surveyed ultimately agreed that it can improve the classroom experience if done well. So go forth and blend your classes. All right, thank you.